The town of Harlow Creek, Georgia sat in that quiet space between forgotten and comfortable. It had a main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office that closed at noon on Fridays, and a police station that had seen the same three faces behind the desk for going on 15 years. The kind of town where everybody knew your name and most of them thought they knew your story too. They were wrong about Commander Elise Navarro. She pulled her silver pickup truck into the parking lot of the Harlow Creek Police Department on a Tuesday morning in early October, the sky low and gray the way Georgia skis get before a cold front moves in. She was dressed simply: dark jeans, a plain navy blue jacket, brown boots worn smooth at the heel. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, no makeup, no jewelry except for a thin silver watch on her left wrist. The only thing that might have caught your eye was the German Shepherd in the back seat, 92 pounds of focused, quiet muscle named Scout, sitting perfectly still, watching the world through the window with the kind of attention that doesn't come naturally. That kind of attention is built over years through trust. Elise stepped out of the truck. Scout waited. She had driven 40 minutes from her sister's place in Caldwell County, where she had been staying since coming home 2 months earlier. Home was a complicated word for her. She had spent the last 14 years of her life in places that were nothing like Georgia: training facilities in Coronado, California, deployments she couldn't name in countries she still couldn't fully talk about, cold water and dark operations, and the kind of pressure that either breaks a person or builds them into something extraordinary. Elise Navarro was the second woman in naval special warfare history to complete the full SEAL qualification pipeline. The first had washed out in the final phase. Elise had not. She didn't tell people that. She didn't wear a shirt that said it. She didn't bring it up in conversations at the grocery store or the gas station. She had come home because her mother was sick, early-stage Parkinson's, manageable for now but demanding more care than her sister Alina could handle alone. And she had come home because after 14 years, something in her had needed a moment to breathe. What she had not expected was to walk into a situation that would test every ounce of that quiet, disciplined strength she had built over a decade and a half of the hardest work any human being could do. She walked toward the entrance of the police department, Scout staying a heel length behind her on his lead. The reason she was here was simple enough. 3 nights ago, someone had broken into her mother's property, the old Navarro house on Route 9, a 4-acre spread with a small horse barn that hadn't seen horses in years. The intruder had gotten into the barn, taken some old tools and a generator that her father had bought in 1987. It wasn't about the generator. It was about the fact that her 71-year-old mother, Rosaria Navarro, had heard the noise and gone outside alone at 2 in the morning to investigate, because no one had told her daughter about the report yet. Elise had filed the report by phone. She was here now for a follow-up, because the deputy who'd taken the call had told her someone would be in touch in 48 hours, and 72 had now passed with no call. She pushed open the glass door. The front desk was occupied by a heavy-set man in his late 40s with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had since grown comfortable with itself in a way that skipped past distinguished and landed somewhere closer to indifferent. His name tag read Deputy R. Colton. He was reading something on his phone and did not look up when the door opened. There was another officer leaning against the far wall near a filing cabinet, younger, maybe 30, with a narrow face and light eyes that moved to Elise immediately, then to Scout, then back to Elise with an expression she recognized without needing to name it. It was the expression of someone deciding in the first 2 seconds exactly how much respect to offer. He had decided not much. "Help you," Colton said, still not looking up. "I'm Elise Navarro. I filed a break-in report 3 days ago for the property at 7742 Route 9. I was told I'd receive a follow-up call within 48 hours. I haven't." Colton set his phone down, looked at her, looked at Scout, looked back at her. "No dogs inside," he said. "He's a working animal, he's not a pet. I don't see a vest on him." Elise kept her voice even. "He doesn't need a vest to be a working animal. I can also step outside if you prefer, but I'd like to speak with whoever is handling my mother's case." The younger officer, his tag said Deputy T. Greer, pushed off the filing cabinet and walked a few steps closer. He had the slow, deliberate walk of someone who wanted to be observed walking. "What kind of work does he do?" Greer asked, nodding at Scout. "Detection and apprehension primarily." Greer looked at her. "You a cop somewhere?" "No." "Military?" "Yes." "Which branch?" Elise looked at him for a moment. Navy. Greer nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth moving in a way that wasn't quite a smile. Navy, he said. What, like you drive boats? Colton made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh. Elise did not react. She had learned long before Harlow Creek that reacting in moments like this gave people something they hadn't earned. She simply held Greer's gaze and said quietly, "I'd like to speak with whoever is handling my mother's case. Can you point me in that direction?" "That would be me," Colton said, pulling himself a little more upright. "And I'm telling you, we got a lot of calls come in. Property crime, no suspects, no witnesses, generator worth what, $200? That's not exactly the top of the priority list." "The value of the generator isn't the issue," Elise said. "My mother is 71 years old, lives alone, and went outside by herself in the middle of the night to confront whoever was on her property. I'd like to know if anyone has been out to look at the scene." "We drove by," Colton said. "Drove by. Checked the perimeter, nothing obvious." Elise took a slow breath through her nose. Scout sat perfectly still beside her, not reacting, just watching, the way he always did, waiting for a signal that never needed to come in a room like this. "I'd like to speak with your sergeant," Elise said. Greer's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. The kind of shift that happens when someone decides to stop being passively dismissive and start being something more deliberate. "Sergeant's busy," he said. "And honestly, ma'am, I don't know what you're expecting us to do here. You want us to dust for prints on a barn in October over a generator. I want someone to take a report seriously." "We took the report. You drove by." The two men looked at each other. It was a brief glance, almost nothing, but Elise had spent 14 years reading rooms, reading people, reading the space between words. That glance said, "Who does she think she is?" It was Greer who said what the glance meant. "Look," he said, settling into a kind of practiced, patient tone that was worse than open hostility because it was coated in false reasonableness. "I'm sure you're used to things running a certain way wherever you were stationed. But this is a small department, we're 2 deputies short, and with all due respect, this isn't the kind of case that—" "I understand resources are limited," Elise said. "I'm not asking for a task force, I'm asking for a follow-up visit and any available information about recent similar incidents in the area. That's a standard ask." "We don't really," Colton started. "Do you have a record of similar property crimes on Route 9 or the surrounding area in the past 6 months? Silence. "Because if this is part of a pattern," Elise continued, "documenting it properly now saves you more work later." Greer looked at her with an expression that had hardened into something she recognized as a very particular kind of pride. The pride of a man who does not like being told anything by a woman who arrived calm, who has not raised her voice, who is clearly not going to be moved. "You know," he said, and his tone was no longer even attempting patience, "we've had a lot of people come in here thinking they know how police work should run. Usually it's people who have never done it." "I haven't done police work," Elise agreed. "I've done other things." "Like drive boats," Colton said. This time the sound he made was unmistakably a laugh. Greer smiled. Scout's ears moved, one small, almost invisible adjustment, the kind that meant he had noticed a shift in the room's energy. He did not stand. He did not growl. He simply became, if anything, more still. Elise looked at both men for a moment. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and placed a business card on the desk in front of Colton. It was a plain white card with her name, her cell number, and a single line beneath, "United States Navy, Ret." "That's my number," she said. "I'd appreciate a call when someone is available to do a proper follow-up on the report. I'll be in the area." She turned and Scout rose and turned with her, perfectly in step, perfectly quiet. Behind her, she heard Greer say something to Colton in a low voice. She caught the word shepherd and then a sound that was definitely laughter. She pushed open the glass door and walked back into the gray October morning. She sat in the truck for a moment, just a moment. Scout had climbed back into the rear seat and was watching her through the gap between the headrests. She reached back and put one hand briefly on the side of his face, not petting, not comforting, just connecting. Then she started the truck and drove. Elise Navarro had grown up in Harlow Creek. She knew this town the way you know a place that shaped you and then let you go, or maybe the way you know a place you outgrew and came back to find it hadn't changed as much as you had hoped. Her father, David Navarro, had been a mechanic, a good one. He had worked 30 years at a shop on the edge of town and had never once called in sick, a fact he was proud of in the quiet, understated way he was proud of most things. He had died of a heart attack when Elise was 22 during her second year of active duty. She had gotten emergency leave, come home, stood at the gravesite in her uniform, and gone back, because that was what you did. That was what he would have wanted. Her mother, Rosaria, was a small woman with a strong spine and the habit of saying more with silence than most people said with words. She had been skeptical when Elise first told her at 19 that she wanted to enlist. Not because she doubted her daughter's strength, she had never doubted that, but because she knew the world her daughter would be walking into, and she knew how it could treat women who refused to make themselves smaller. Just be ready, Rosaria had told her. They will ask you to prove yourself more than once, more than twice. You prove it every time. You don't get tired of proving it, you just prove it. Elise had written that down. She still had it on a piece of paper folded small inside the back cover of the notebook she'd carried through 2 deployments. She had joined the Navy at 19, had proven herself again and again and again through Bud S, through SQT, through years of work that she could not describe in detail to most people, in places she still sometimes saw in the borderland between sleep and waking. She had become, along the way, one of the most skilled combat swimmers and K-9 handlers in naval special warfare. She had partnered with Scout 5 years ago when he was 18 months old, fresh out of the Lackland Air Force Base training pipeline, a big-eared, serious-eyed shepherd who had taken one look at her and decided she was his person. They had been through things together that bonded people and animals in ways that ordinary life didn't quite have language for. She had come home to Georgia carrying all of that, invisible under plain clothes and a quiet manner, and walked into a police department where 2 men had decided in under 5 minutes that she was someone's confused relative who watched too many crime shows. It would have been funny if it hadn't been about her mother's safety. She spent the rest of the morning at her mother's house. The property was modest but well kept. Her sister Alina had seen to that during the years Elise was away. The house was white with green shutters, the porch slightly bowed in the middle from years of weather, 2 rocking chairs that no one sat in anymore because Rosaria's balance wasn't what it had been. The barn sat 30 yards behind the house, separated by a stretch of grass that still held the shape of a garden her mother had kept for 20 years and gradually surrendered to age. The barn doors had a simple latch, no padlock, which was something Elise noted and intended to fix before the end of the day. She walked the perimeter herself with Scout, the way she would have walked any site, slowly, methodically, reading the ground. The soil near the east side of the barn was soft from a recent rain, and even after 3 days there were impressions. Boot prints, 2 sets, one significantly larger than the other. The larger print had a distinctive pattern on the heel, a starburst design that she photographed with her phone. The smaller had a worn smooth sole, like someone who had had the same shoes too long. Inside the barn she found what Colton had apparently not, a cigarette butt near the back wall, tucked behind an old shelf unit. She bagged it in a sandwich bag she had in her jacket pocket. Old habit. She also found on the interior side of the barn door a small smear of something dark, paint or grease, that had not been there before, pressed against the wood at about hip height, as though someone had leaned their hip against the door while standing in one place for a while. None of this was beyond the capacity of 2 deputies to find if they had actually gotten out of their car and looked. She photographed everything, made notes, checked the timestamp on each photo. Then she fixed the barn door latch, installing a proper padlock she had picked up at the hardware store on the way over. She checked the locks on all 3 exterior doors of the house. Found the back door lock was loose, replaced the screws with longer ones, proper gauge. Her mother watched from the porch, wrapped in a cardigan despite the relatively mild air, holding a mug of tea. Did they do anything? Rosaria asked when Elise came back toward the house. They drove by, Elise said. Rosaria was quiet for a moment. Your father always said the measure of a place is how it treats people who need something, she said. He wasn't wrong. What are you going to do? Elise looked back at the barn. Scout was sitting at the edge of the porch steps, watching the tree line with that calm, unbroken focus. I'm going to do what I do, she said. I'm going to be patient and I'm going to be thorough and I'm going to pay attention. She did not go back to the police station that week. She had learned early in her military career that return trips made in frustration almost never produced better outcomes than the first trip. What produced outcomes was information, documentation, and the right moment. She spent those days in a kind of double life. In the morning, she helped her sister with their mother, doctor's appointments, medication management, the slow, practical work of restructuring a household around new limitations. In the afternoons, she ran with Scout on the old logging roads behind the Route 9 property, long, quiet miles in the pine-scented air, the kind of running that wasn't about fitness so much as it was about clarity. She also started paying attention to the neighborhood. Harlow Creek was the kind of place where people talked, and if you listened in the right places, the diner, the gas station, the waiting room at the county health clinic, you could learn a remarkable amount. She was not eavesdropping exactly. She was present. She was paying attention. There was a difference. What she learned over the course of about a week was this: she was not the only one. 3 other properties along Route 9 and the adjacent Mill Creek Road had reported break-ins in the past 4 months. All of them barns, sheds, garages, all of them tools, small equipment, generators. 2 of those reports had been filed with the Harlow Creek Police Department. One family, the Hendersons, a retired couple whose son had gone to school with Elise's sister, had been told almost the exact same thing Elise had been told. We drove by, nothing obvious, low priority. The third family hadn't even bothered filing a report. Didn't see the point. The wife, a woman named Adele Marsh, told Elise over the counter at the diner where Adele worked Tuesday through Saturday. My husband said those 2 deputies wouldn't do anything useful if you handed it to them wrapped up with a bow. Did you have any sense of who it might have been? Adele looked at her carefully. She was maybe 65 with the calm, measuring eyes of a woman who had learned to weigh people quickly. You're Rosaria's daughter, she said, the one who was in the military.
Yes,
They broke into your mama's place too.
they did.
Adele was quiet for a moment, then she said, there's a property about 2 miles east on Mill Creek. Abandoned place used to be the old Darton farm. Some of the neighbors have seen lights out there at night. Nobody official has gone to look.
Yeah.
Elise wrote it down when she got back to the truck. It was near the end of that first week when she had her second encounter with Greer and Colton. She had driven into town for groceries and parked in front of the market on Main Street. She was walking back to the truck with 2 bags when a patrol car pulled slowly alongside her and Greer rolled down the window. Ms. Navarro, he said. The way he said it was just a fraction too casual to be respectful. Deputy Greer. Heard you've been asking around about property crimes. She looked at him. I've been talking to neighbors. Right. He rested his arm on the window frame. Here's the thing, when civilians start doing their own investigating, it tends to complicate things, interfere with active cases. Is my mother's case active?
A pause.
All reported cases are active, he said. Has anyone visited the scene? Another pause, slightly longer. We're managing resources appropriately. Elise shifted the grocery bags slightly and looked at him with an expression that was not unfriendly and not the opposite. Deputy, she said, I spent 14 years managing high-stakes operations with limited resources. I understand what that looks like from the inside. What I'm looking at right now doesn't look like that. Greer's jaw moved slightly. You know, I looked you up, he said. After you came in, Navy veteran, that's great, thank you for your service, but whatever it is you think you were doing over there, this is Harlow Creek, Georgia, this is not. I'm aware of where I am, she said. He stared at her. There was something in his eyes now that had moved past dismissiveness into something more deliberate, more personal. She had seen it before in training in the field, in the quiet bureaucratic wars that ran alongside the real ones. It was the look of someone who felt, without being able to say it clearly, that her existence in this space was a kind of challenge to his authority, even when she hadn't raised her voice or made a single accusation. Just be careful, he said, and the way he said careful had 2 meanings, the way certain words do. He rolled the window up and the patrol car moved on. Scout in the back seat of the truck watched the patrol car until it turned a corner, then he looked at Elise. She loaded the groceries, started the truck, sat for a moment looking at the steering wheel. Just be ready, her mother had told her years ago, they will ask you to prove yourself more than once. She pulled out of the parking spot and drove toward the old Darton farm on Mill Creek Road. She didn't go onto the property, she didn't need to, not yet. She parked on the road shoulder and used a pair of small binoculars she kept in the glove compartment, standard issue mentality. She still kept basic kit in the truck and she looked. The farmhouse was collapsed on one side, clearly uninhabitable. But the outbuilding behind it, a large metal-sided structure that had probably been a machine shed, was in better condition. Its doors were closed, but there were fresh tire tracks in the mud at the approach, clearly recent given the rain 2 days ago. There was also, just visible from her angle, a cable run along the exterior of the building, the kind of cable that brought power from a generator. She noted the time, took photographs with the zoom lens she kept in the console, another holdover from a different life, made notes. Then she drove away because she had not made any decision yet about what to do with what she was finding. She was gathering, she was patient, she was thorough. She was paying attention. And down in the police station, in a building she was done asking for help from, two men were going about their day, completely convinced that the woman they had laughed at was no longer a consideration. They had made their first mistake with the laugh. They were about to make their second by forgetting her entirely. Scout rode home in the back seat, ears alert, watching everything and saying nothing, the way he always did, the way that Elise had always loved about him. He didn't waste energy on doubt. He didn't spend a single moment wondering whether she was capable. He just watched and waited and trusted her completely. It was, she thought, a rare and valuable thing. The second week of October in Harlow Creek came in colder than the first, and Elise found herself waking before dawn out of old habit, the habit of 14 years that no amount of civilian life had yet unwired. She would lie still for a moment in the small back bedroom of her sister's house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of a sleeping neighborhood, and then she would rise because there was simply no version of herself that stayed in bed once her mind was awake. Scout slept at the foot of the bed. He too was awake when she rose, always awake when she rose, as though some current ran between them that carried information without sound. She would make coffee, sit at the kitchen table in the dark, think. She had a system, built over years of planning operations, where incomplete information was the standard condition and the cost of a mistake was measured in human lives. You gathered what you had, you identified what you didn't have, you filled the gaps carefully and honestly without substituting assumption for evidence. Then you made a decision that you were prepared to stand behind. What she had, as of the middle of that second week. Photographs of boot prints, 2 sets outside her mother's barn, time-stamped and documented. A bagged cigarette butt from the barn interior. A photograph of a grease smear on the barn door interior. Photographs of the Darton Farm outbuilding with visible fresh tire tracks and exterior power cable. The names and contact information of 3 other families who had experienced similar property crimes in the past 4 months. Notes from conversations with those families, documenting dates, descriptions of losses, and their interactions or lack of meaningful interaction with the Harlow Creek Police Department. What she didn't have, the identity of the people using that Darton property, a direct connection between that location and the break-ins, anything that rose to the level of proof rather than reasonable suspicion. She was not going to go to Deputy Greer or Deputy Colton. She was going to go instead to the county. The Langford County Sheriff's Office was located in the county seat, a town called Mabry, about 22 miles from Harlow Creek. The sheriff was a woman named Doris Elaine Whitfield, 61 years old, 28 years in law enforcement, a woman who had, according to the diner conversations Elise had been quietly absorbing, a reputation for doing things by the book and meaning it. Elise made an appointment. She brought a folder. The folder contained printed copies of all her photographs, organized chronologically with written notes on each. It contained a typed summary of her conversations with the 3 affected neighbors, with their contact information and their signed permissions to share their accounts. It contained a timeline of reported crimes and the documented response or documented non-response from the Harlow Creek PD. She sat across from Sheriff Whitfield in a clean, practical office and laid the folder on the desk. Whitfield was a solid woman with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses that she picked up immediately. She read for several minutes without speaking, then she set the glasses down and looked at Elise. "You put this together yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. This is thorough. I tried to be thorough." Whitfield looked at her for a moment with the appraising, unhurried attention of someone who had spent nearly 3 decades reading people across a desk. "What did you do in the Navy?" "Special operations." A slight pause. "SEAL." Elise met her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Whitfield was quiet for a moment, then she looked back at the folder. "The Darton property," she said. We've had our eye on that location for unrelated reasons. This, she tapped the photograph of the tire tracks and the cable, is consistent with some activity we've been tracking. Elise did not allow herself to feel anything obvious. I thought it was worth nodding. It is, Whitfield looked up again. I'm going to ask you something directly and I'd like you to answer me directly.
Of course.
Did you enter that property? No, ma'am, everything in those photographs was taken from the public road shoulder. Whitfield nodded slowly. All right, I'm going to look into this, your mother's case and the pattern of incidents. I'm also going to have a conversation with the Harlow Creek Department regarding their response documentation. She paused. That may create some friction.
I understand.
For you, I mean. I understand that too. Whitfield studied her for a moment, then she said in a slightly different tone, not softer exactly, but more direct in a way that was also more personal. I spent the first 8 years of my career being told in various ways that I didn't belong in the room. I imagine you know something about that. Elise held her gaze. I do. The answer I eventually found, Whitfield said, was to be so prepared, so thorough, and so consistently right that the argument became exhausting to maintain. She closed the folder. You seem to have arrived at the same conclusion. My mother told me something like that a long time ago. Whitfield almost smiled. Smart woman. The smartest I know. The friction came faster than Elise had expected. By the following Monday, 4 days after her meeting with Sheriff Whitfield, Greer was at her sister's front door. Elena opened it and called for Elise, who came from the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, Scout at her heel. She stepped onto the front porch. Greer was standing at the bottom of the porch steps in his uniform, hands on his belt in the way that people do when they are trying to look relaxed and do not quite manage it. His patrol car was in the driveway. Deputy, Elise said. We need to talk, he said. All right. You went to the county sheriff's office. It was not a question. I did, she said. His jaw worked for a moment. You want to tell me why? I filed a report at your station 10 days ago. I asked for a follow-up. I asked for information about similar incidents in the area. None of those requests produced any response. I went to the next available resource. You went over our heads because you were impatient. I went to the county because I was concerned for my mother's safety, and I had compiled information that I believed was relevant to an ongoing pattern of criminal activity in this area. I wanted that information in the hands of someone with the capacity and the inclination to act on it. Greer's face had gone through several expressions during this. The one it had settled on was something between anger and calculation. You have no idea what you may have interfered with, he said. If there's an active investigation that my documentation has complicated, I would like to understand that clearly. If you can explain it to me, I'm here. He stared at her. That's what I thought, she said quietly, not cruelly, just honestly. He took a breath. Ms. Navarro, he said, and his voice had changed, still controlled, but with something running underneath it that was less professional and more personal. I want to be real clear with you. This town has been here a long time. The people who run this town. Deputy, she said. And something in the way she said it, the steadiness of it, the complete absence of any edge or anger, the simple weight of one word from someone who has stood in situations where the stakes were genuinely life and death, stopped him. He looked at her. I grew up here, she said. I know this town. I left at 19 because I had a calling and I went away and I served my country for 14 years. I have come home because my mother needs me. That is the extent of my agenda. I have not accused anyone of anything. I have not made any public statements. I compiled factual information and shared it through appropriate channels with a law enforcement official of appropriate jurisdiction. That is what I am allowed to do. That is what any citizen is allowed to do. She held his gaze. If you have something specific to say to me, she continued, I'm listening. If this is meant to be a discouragement, I want you to understand something. Discouragement is not a condition I'm particularly susceptible to. Greer stood there for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car. Scout watched the car back out of the driveway. His tail did not wag, his ears stayed forward. He watched until the car was gone. Then he looked up at Elise. She scratched him once behind the ear. I know, she said quietly, I know. What happened next came from the county. not from anything Elise did directly. She learned it in pieces, from Sheriff Whitfield, who called her on a Wednesday evening and spoke carefully but clearly. From the local news, which ran a brief story the following Friday that most people in Harlow Creek probably read and then forgot within 24 hours. And from Adele Marsh at the diner, who called her cell phone on a Saturday morning because Adele had heard things through the channels that small towns run on, the invisible networks of who knows whose cousin and who talked to whose neighbor. This is what had happened. The Darton Farm property had been under observation by the county sheriff's office for almost 6 weeks, not for property crime, but as part of a broader inquiry into a fencing operation, someone buying and reselling stolen goods out of the region. Elise's photographs and documentation of the tire tracks and power cable had provided the corroborating detail that allowed Whitfield's office to move forward on a warrant. When they executed the warrant, they found in that metal-sided outbuilding stolen tools, stolen generators, including one that matched the description and the serial number of the one taken from the Navarro barn, stolen ATV parts, a small tractor component, and several other items traceable to property crimes in Langford County over the past 6 months. They also found, in the records of the operation, evidence suggesting that someone had been tipping off the people running the shed about when it might be safe or unsafe to move inventory. The nature of the tip-offs suggested someone with knowledge of patrol schedules. Elise did not know at that point whether Colton and Greer were dirty or simply incompetent. She suspected the answer was somewhere in the uncomfortable middle, that at least one of them knew more than he had let on, and that what she had seen in that station, the casual dismissal, the laughing, the aggressive visit to her sister's door, had not been purely about condescension and small-town pride. It had also been about keeping her from looking too closely. That was confirmed, quietly and officially, when Sheriff Whitfield called her the second time. "Deputy Colton," Whitfield said, and her voice was careful in the way of someone who was choosing each word because words had legal weight, "has been placed on administrative leave pending a departmental review. I can't share details beyond what's appropriate for a civilian, but I can tell you that your documentation contributed materially to identifying a timeline discrepancy in reporting that had consequences we're now working through." And the people in the shed. 3 individuals were arrested, 2 are local, 1 has priors for property crime in 2 other counties. A pause. "We recovered your mother's generator. It will be returned to her once it clears evidence processing. Shouldn't be more than 2 weeks." Elise sat with the phone pressed to her ear in the kitchen of her sister's house, her mother visible through the doorway in the living room, doing a slow puzzle at the table, her hands moving carefully, deliberately, the way they moved now.
"Sheriff," she said. "Yes."
"Thank you for taking the meeting." "Thank you for being prepared for it," Whitfield said. "Not everyone is." She told her mother that evening. Rosaria listened without interrupting, which was how she listened to things that mattered. When Elise was finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. "They laughed at you," Rosaria said.
"They did."
"And you just went ahead."
"I did."
Rosaria looked at her daughter for a long time with the particular, unhurried attention of a woman who had raised this person and watched her leave and worried and prayed and waited and watched her come back, and was now sitting across from someone who was both entirely familiar and deeply foreign, someone she had made and who had gone and become something beyond what she could have known to hope for. "Your father would have loved to see this," Rosaria said softly. Elise felt something shift just briefly in her chest. "I know. He used to say you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met," Rosaria said. "He meant it as the highest praise." Elise smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone, that just happens because something inside is genuinely warm. "I know," she said again. The story did not become a big story. It was not on the evening news in Atlanta. There was no press conference, no moment where Elise stood at a podium while people clapped. The Harlow Creek Gazette ran a 3-paragraph item about the arrests and the property recovery. It mentioned that evidence had been provided by a local resident. It did not name her. She was fine with that. What did happen was quieter and in some ways more meaningful. The Henderson family. The retired couple from Route 9, their name was Barbara and Jean Henderson, came to the Navarro house one evening with a covered dish of Barbara's chicken and dumplings, because that was what people in Harlow Creek did when something happened that warranted acknowledgement and they weren't sure quite what to say. Barbara Henderson held Elise's hand for a moment at the door and said, "Jean and I know it was you. We just want you to know that we know." Elise thanked her and said that she was glad it had worked out. Adele Marsh at the diner made a point of coming out from behind the counter the next time Elise came in for coffee. She sat down across from her in the booth. I've been telling people, Adele said, what I know about what you did.
You don't need to do that.
I know I don't need to, Adele said simply. I'm doing it because it's right, because this town has a habit of not giving credit where credit is due, and I've been watching that happen my whole life, and I'm 67 years old and I've run out of patience for it.
Elise looked at her.
You went to that station, Adele continued, and those two laughed at you and you walked out and you did the work anyway. That deserves to be known. Deputy Greer was not placed on leave. The investigation did not find evidence connecting him directly to the operation. He remained on duty. Elise passed his patrol car twice in the following weeks. The first time he did not look at her. The second time at a stop sign their windows were side by side for a moment and he did look at her. She met his gaze, steady, calm, not triumphant.
He looked away first.
That was, she thought, probably the most that situation was going to give, and she decided it was enough. Scout got his run every morning, rain or shine, on the old logging roads. He was 11 miles into a Tuesday run when Elise stopped at the crest of a long, gradual hill, the kind of hill that opens up to sky on all sides and lets you see the full spread of a Georgia morning, gold light on the pine tops, mist still in the low places, a sky going from pearl to blue in the east. She stood there, breathing easy, hands on her hips, and Scout sat beside her in the leaves and they looked at it together. She thought about what it meant to come home. Not the version of home you carry with you in memory, the idealized one, the one that stays frozen, but the actual one, the one that has changed and not changed and that looks back at you and has to decide what it thinks. She thought about her father, who had been proud of her in a language that was mostly silence and showing up. She thought about her mother, who was at home right now in the kitchen, moving carefully but moving, who had told her, at 19 you prove it every time, you don't get tired of proving it. She thought about 14 years of cold water and dark operations and long miles and the specific, clarifying experience of being told by the world that you probably couldn't do something and then doing it, and then being told again, and then doing it again. She thought about that police station, those two men, the laugh. She had not proven them wrong by yelling. She had not proven them wrong by demanding recognition or making speeches. She had proven them wrong the only way that actually sticks, by doing the work, carefully and thoroughly and without permission, and letting the results speak at a volume that didn't need her voice. That was the thing about real strength. It didn't need to announce itself. It just kept moving, it kept showing up. It gathered what it had, identified what it didn't have, filled the gaps, and made decisions it was prepared to stand behind. Scout leaned slightly against her leg, not seeking comfort but offering it, the way he sometimes did in his quiet and complete way. She put her hand on his back between his shoulder blades and felt the warmth of him and the steadiness. Okay, she said aloud to the morning, to the pine trees, to her father somewhere in the quiet she still carried him in. Okay. Then she turned and they ran back down the hill together, the woman nobody had seen coming and the dog who had never once doubted her, back toward the house where her mother was making coffee, back toward the life she was building here, in the town that was finally, slowly, beginning to understand what it was looking at. Some people move through the world loudly, demanding to be seen, and some, the ones who have been tested in ways most of us will never know, move quietly and do the work and let the truth catch up in its own time. Elise Navarro came home to a town that laughed at her and she did not fight the laugh. She outlasted it, she outworked it, she outprepared it. And when the moment came, she was ready, not because she had been given anything but because she had built herself, year by year and mile by mile and choice by choice, into someone that no amount of small laughter could touch. That is not a special kind of strength. It is the only kind that endures.